Hello, everyone. My name is Ernest. Few people can believe this, but now I'll tell you an amazing story about my brother and my father. We try to tell very few people about this because many people become afraid or don't believe it or ask too many questions. But I was wondering if it might be useful to someone, and maybe there are other people like my family in the world. I have an older brother. His name is Nikon, and we were born 4 years apart. Our parents are educated people. My mother has been at home for many years because of us, her children. But my father works at a difficult job. He's a medical surgeon. Those whose parents are doctors understand what it's like, because most of the time, they're not at home. My mother is also a doctor. She's a therapist. She and my father could have made a great duet in the hospital, but my mother sacrificed her career for her sons. You see, it's not that simple. My brother was often ill, almost all the time, so my parents could not send him to kindergarten or leave him with a nanny. So there's only one way out. As my mother told me, when Nick was born, everything went wrong. My mother's pregnancy was planned and desired. She followed all the rules, ate healthy food, tried not to overwork, immediately took half of the rate at work, and worked only half the day. Suddenly, when she was 6 months pregnant, she had a stomach ache. Dad and Mom went to the hospital immediately, where my mother lost consciousness. Because the situation was difficult, it was decided to give her a cesarean section. My dad was not allowed in the operating room because he was too excited, and the delivery was taken by his assistant. Many people said that the child would not survive. It was too short of a time, and the baby itself was terribly weak. They connected him to an artificial respiration machine, inserted some tubes with droppers, put him in a special box where he stayed for almost 3 months. My mother didn't recover until a few days later. All this time, the child was taken care of by nurses, and thanks to his position, my father could also visit him whenever he wanted. Everyone was terribly worried about them, especially Dad. In the end, everything was left behind. The baby and mother survived, came to their senses. The boy was named Nikon, and since then, he's grown up and gotten stronger. It seemed that everything would be all right. Otherwise, there was no way, because they were literally torn from the clutches of death. They left the hospital and went home. As the months passed, they got better and better, and then my brother turned 1 year old. My mother threw a big party in honor of this, decorated the house, invited a lot of neighbors, friends, and relatives. They'd been preparing for the holiday for a month. And when that day came, a custom-made cake arrived, and my mother carried Nick out on her arms to blow out the candles. Everyone stood waiting with smiles on their faces and cameras in their hands to capture the moment, the first blowing out of the candles. Nick didn't even smile when he saw the cake. It tried to cheer him up, talked and joked, and he went up to him, looked at the candles for a long time, and suddenly fell to the ground. He fell right in the middle of the yard. My mother's hands were shaking from fear and surprise. She was confused, grabbed her son in her arms, and automatically began to perform artificial respiration. My father at this time believed the pulse, did some other manipulations. The guests called an ambulance. The diagnosis was disappointing. The doctor said that the boy had heart problems. At first, it was a shock, but then, pulling himself together, my father said that he would perform an operation. But for this, he needed a different heart, a healthy one. He wouldn't have lived with the old one for 6 months. Whatever they did and how they did not look, but everything was useless. The search was reduced to failures. Then Dad decided on the impossible, to make a mechanical heart. Yes, I agree, it sounds like science fiction, but that's not all. It was a difficult step. But what can't you do to save your own child? I don't know what happened next, because my mother doesn't go into details. I only know that they managed to find people and do everything right, as my father said. The operation was performed for more than 20 hours, but in the end, it worked. Unbelievable. My brother's breath came in and his pulse started to beat. I think my mother almost fainted. How could this be done? However, after this operation, Nick was forced to constantly undergo examinations, take tests and all that. Still, the foreign body was inside him. He has a scar now all over his body, but that's nothing compared to the possibility of living. But this test was not the last, unfortunately. Nick was not developing well. He was also often ill and could do many things with difficulty. His parents were crazy for the first 3 years of his life, but they didn't give up. In short, during these years, Nick was ill with something else, broke his legs and arms, and his bones could not heal properly as a result. He had metal plates inserted in him. As a result, there were so many of them in his body that Mom and Dad jokingly called him a robot. No, Nick wasn't offended, because Dad said that he was a special child. Not like everyone else, and there was nothing wrong with that. A year later, my mother got pregnant again, and I was born. Only here I grew up a healthy child. Perhaps the prayers of my parents were heard, and they were frequent and sincere. When I was growing up, I didn't know much about my brother at first. We always had separate rooms and lots of drugs. I didn't touch them because I was forbidden. I was taught from an early age how to communicate with Nick, what games we could play with him, and whatnot. And then I got so used to it that it just seemed normal to me. And then, we went to school with him. Due to multiple surgeries, Nick went to first grade with me. He lost a lot of time spending it in the hospitals. In my class, he was the tallest and most grown up, which made a lot of kids laugh at him. And I felt sorry for him, because Nick never hurt anyone. Despite the fact that he has a metal heart, arms, and legs, and something else in his ribs, he was kind. He didn't scold me when I broke something from his toys, allowed me to take everything and even break it. I stood up for him at first. The teachers were understanding, but they didn't know much. It turns out his only friend in the class was just me. My father always told me not to look at our age difference and to protect my brother. So I did. And one day, a few years later, Nick went to the hospital again, in the morning, with Mother. They needed to be checked out. I came to class alone, where my evil classmates were already waiting for me. They began to tease my brother, calling him a scar because of the injuries on his body. We didn't tell anyone that these are consequences of operations, and the guys thought he was born like this. And, "Where is your freak?" asked the most ardent. I gave him the middle finger and he punched me in the stomach. It was in the schoolyard. Everyone immediately crowded in and started shouting the idiot's name, and I was writhing in pain and lying on the grass. Every time I tried to get up, he kicked me in the stomach, and I thought I was going to spit my guts out. Then he knocked me down again, rolled me over, and sat on top of me, swinging his fist to hit me, and I squeezed his hand. I was so happy to see him. That kid was shocked by Nick's strength. He didn't know my brother had a robot arm. Nick flung him aside with one left hand, and Zach flew at least 3 meters in the air and fell with a crash. The guys watching the scene got scared and ran away, and Zach started crying. Since then, he promised not to touch me or my brother again, and also ran away. I jumped up joyfully and hugged Nikon at that moment. I realized that it was not me who needed to protect him. Many years have passed since then. Nick found a group of guys who have all sorts of metal things in their bodies. I also call him Robot or Terminator. He didn't take offense, only laughed in response. After all, he had a bright soul, and no tools can fix it, right? That's how we grew up, side by side. Our parents helped him and me with everything. But then Nick took on that role as the eldest. He adapted to life, started working, and even fell in love. So what I want to tell you is that no matter what we were made of, the soul is important. No matter how much my father changed in Nick's body, his inner qualities remained unchanged. Maybe it was because Mom and Dad gave him love and care. I think so. That's the point. So it's not always possible to draw conclusions by looking only at the appearance. If a scarred man has a heart as good as my brother's, then he must be loved, and he'll pay it back 100 times more.